Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Thoughts in History from the Centenarian with Dale Dyer. I know it's been a while since our last episode, and I really don't have a good excuse for the delay except, as I'll explain in the beginning of the episode, I had technical issues with the audio and video from some of the other interviews I had with Dad and ended up losing the files, but I'll go into more detail about that later. In this episode, we'll be getting into the early days of Dale's military training, how he ended up transferring from the Army Infantry to the Air Corps, some of his exploits as a flight instructor in the B-24s, and other interesting stories from his early days in flight training. So sit back and enjoy. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Thoughts in History from a Centenarian with Dale Dyer. I know it's been a long time since our last episode. I was actually up here several months ago, right around, when was that? Pop, was that Veterans Day back in the spring?
Probably was.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Veterans Day, and I had gotten some footage then and was working on editing it out to upload, and I noticed that the audio kept getting off because I was using another device that my phone and a different app on my phone, which didn't seem to be working. Every once in a while during the interview, it would just all of a sudden pop for some reason, and it would get off track, and I never could get it lined up, so I was having to do it manually, and I got frustrated with it and walked away from it for a while, and in the process, somewhere along the line, I lost all of my audio and video clips, and so now here we are, we're having to do it all over again. So we're actually going to start back from where we had left off on our last episode, where Dale had graduated college and was fixing to join the Army Air Corps right before the war, well, right around the time the war had broke out in Europe. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, if that was in the early 40s, or that's what you're referring to?
Well, whenever you was well, actually, you didn't graduate college. It was while you were in college, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you were in your senior year, but you only had maybe a few credits, a couple of credits that you had to get before you graduated, but you wasn't able to do that because you got called up.
Well, I had started out college in business administration as my studies, and I did that for the first year, and then I decided to change over to engineering, and I had not taken the courses in high school that I should have taken, all the math courses that you should have before you go to college. So I had to take a bunch of those courses, and being high school studies, I didn't get credit at college for that towards my graduation. So I tried to take enough hours each semester to catch up. So I was taking 18 hours every semester throughout the next 3 years. And when at the end of my fourth year, I still liked 8 hours of having enough for graduation. That was in 1942, and Pearl Harbor happened in December of 41, and I'd taken ROTC, infantry, the 4 years, and at the end of that fourth year, I received my commission as second lieutenant when we graduated, when the school finished that year. And also I had taken a CPT pilot training course that the government was offering at that time, and before the end of the year, I had my private pilot's license. I had got in enough hours, so when they give us our commission, they give that in one hand, and the other hand, they give us orders to report for duty at Fort Riley, Kansas, which is near Junction City, Camp Funston. During World War One, I was there at Fort Riley for about 3 days when I reported, and they shipped me down to Anniston, Alabama, infantry at Anniston, Fort McClellan, and I tried to transfer to the Air Corps, but I couldn't. They wouldn't let me transfer. Our post commander was General Phil Loon, who was an old West Pointer, and he didn't want to release me, and he turned me down 3 times in the next few months. Finally, I got a notice, or saw a notice in the newspaper, Sunday paper, while I was there at Fort McClellan, that anybody that wants to transfer from any other branch of service to the Air Force to write such and such an office in Washington, D.C. So I sat down and wrote that, and 3 days later I had orders to report to Montgomery, Alabama, to take a physical, and I did that and came back, and 3 days later I had orders to transfer to the Air Corps, but General Falloon didn't like that very well, and he sent for me to come to his office, and I did, and I walked in, and I could just see almost sparks in his eyes, and he gave me quite a lecture for going over his head. And he told me, he says, when I started to leave, he says, you remember, if you flunk out and you're flying, you automatically come back to this outfit, and I will not forget you. That put a little incentive of
I would say
one
so.
that's going to make a success out of my flying career. But anyway, it was quite an experience.
So eventually, you ended up after you went to Nashville. You went to Nashville to take.
Well, when I went through flight training, the first place where we really did at Maxwell Field, Montgomery, Alabama, we had about 2 months of pre-flight training, taking different courses of flight, all about flying in the airplanes and weather, and we had to take code, dit dot,
Morse code.
Morse code,
Morse
and
code.
that was a lot of the fellows just they hated that worse than anything else, but that we had to take it and try to pass the requirements on it. Anyway, my first flying experience in the Air Force, we were sent to Anniston, Alabama, a little field. It wasn't a paved runway. It was just a grass field, and we flew Stearman biplane, and that was the first training. Well, I soloed on that plane, and then the instructor went with me one day to show me some practice maneuvers to get more proficient in holding your altitude and your rate of turn and your climbing rate and your descending rates and so forth. Well, we picked two identical pylons on the ground and flew a figure eight around those two pylons, and you kept the plane in a constant bank and not lose altitude and so forth, and or airspeed. And we did that for a half hour or an hour. And he said, take me back to the base, and I did. He said, now go back and do another half hour or hour on that. I went back by myself, and I hadn't been back 10 minutes and flying that figure eight, and all at once the oil seal on the propeller shaft had give way and sucked all the oil out of the engine, all over the engine and all over me, because it was open cockpit, and I had it all over my face and all over my uniform and everything. I was only at about less than 500 feet above the ground doing these figure eights, and it didn't take very long till the engine froze up without any oil in it, and I was coming down, and I looked around, and there was nothing but trees. Every place that I looked, it was just a solid forest in that particular area. And I come down, and I was kind of trying to pick a big tree that I could fly into and maybe survive a crash into the tree, and let that be kind of slow me down before I hit the ground. And just as I was getting down to the trees, all at once, right in front of me, there was a 4-acre cotton patch, open little field. I cleared the last tree and right down on the ground, and I got stopped about 30 feet from the other end of the field. And I was sitting there in the plane filling out the report, because it's one of the requirements that you was supposed to report anything that was wrong with the plane before you got out of it. And I was filling that out. And all at once I heard somebody holler at me, and I looked around, and there was a whole big circle of black folks that was in a area where there's nothing but black folks, evidently. And they was out about 100 yards from a plane, and this one black boy hollered at me and wanted to know if I was all right, and I says yes, and I told him would he come over to the plane, and he did, and I told him that I needed somebody to protect this airplane and not let anybody bother it or get around it, and he agreed to do that. I give him some money, and I says, I got to get to a telephone, because that plane, we didn't have any communication by radio on that particular plane. And I said, I got to get to a telephone and report that I'm down. And he says, well, I got a bicycle over there you can use, and there's a farmhouse about 3 miles down an old sandy road, and he says you can go there and maybe they got a telephone. I thanked him for letting me use his bicycle, and I took off, and it was about 3 miles. Got there to that house. They did not have a telephone. They had an old truck in the yard, and the fellow says, well, out about another 3 miles, folks I believe do have a telephone. And so he jumped in the truck and took me over to the other house, and I called in and told them what had happened and where I was, and they said, well, some of the other boys up flying and saw me go down and had come by and flew over and got my number off, and they'd already reported where I was down and everything. Well, anyway, for them to recover that airplane, they had to take the wings off of it and pull it 6 miles to a field that was big enough that they could take off after they put a new engine in the plane and put the wings back on. So I don't know how the Lord really took care of me, that I didn't have to fly into the tops of the trees instead of into that field. It just showed up all at once right in front of me. Anyway, after that, we finished, got our time in on the Stearman, and then we were sent to a field at Montgomery. Flew a metal plane. It was much more powerful. It had 450 horsepower. That was quite an experience on that plane.
It wasn't a Stearman, was it?
No, it was a.
Was it still single engine or multi-engine?
It was just single engine.
Single engine.
Yeah, but I used to like to do a lot of acrobatics with it. It was real good, but you're supposed to not start any acrobatics less than 8,000 feet, because if you can get into some maneuvers and lose it, and it took that much altitude to recover from it. It was a powerful plane, but one thing that I like to do with it, I dive down, I get up to the altitude and dive down and get a lot of speed, and then turn the thing straight up and do a roll, then lay it out on top and fly on. And I did that the last flight that I made from that field before we went on to the advanced course. I'd been over to another auxiliary field doing touch and goes, and I wanted to do this one more time, since it was going to be my last flight in that plane. But I started it too low, and when I went to pull it straight up, I stalled out, and you go into a spin, and I leveled off about 400 feet. Recovering from that stall, I was way too low for what I should have been. So I survived that.
It's sort of like you and me were talking about at lunch. The Lord sure has watched over you during your flying years, hasn't He?
He sure has, and it's been remarkable in so many ways that I just can't thank Him enough. Anyway, we were sent to Columbus, Mississippi for advanced, and we were flying twin engines, AT 9 and 10s, Curtiss and Beechcrafts. Another student and our instructor, told us that the AT-10 was a pretty nice and easy plane to fly. The AT-9 was a tricky plane to fly. And went out, we were assigned to take one of the AT-9s and fly from Columbus, Mississippi to Chattanooga on a cross country. When I got in the plane, I asked my partner, the other student, how much time he had on this plane, and he says, well, this is my first time I've ever been in it. It was my first time to ever been in it. Neither one had been checked out on it. So we took off, and one of us would fly to Chattanooga, and the other one would fly back from Chattanooga. Well, when we got to Chattanooga and Lookout Mountain, the clouds, the top of the mountain was in the clouds, so we had to stay below it. We had to follow the river around to get into Chattanooga, and there was a rainstorm right over the airfield in Chattanooga, and we had to circle twice before we could.
Sorry about that, folks. We had some disturbances going on behind us. We had a truck that was leaving next door, and I was waiting until he got out of the neighborhood before I started back up. Sorry for the interruption, but we'll pick up there where we left off. Dad was a student himself, flying with another student who'd never been in the plane before, flying over Chattanooga, right?
That's right. When we got there, the rainstorm was over the field, and so we couldn't land. We had to circle the field a couple times before it moved off enough that we could land. And we didn't have any trouble. Anyway, we was there for just a short time, and then we took off again and headed back to Columbus, Mississippi, where we was stationed. Well, we got back to Columbus just as a windstorm hit our airfield, and as we was coming in to land, that windstorm had one wing way up in the air and the other one down almost on the ground, and it was bouncing us all around, and we did get it straightened out and got landed, and didn't damage the airplane. Well, our instructor had failed to get us passed on that flying that plane. He got an awful lot of trouble for assigning us that hot plane.
Without certifying y'all on it?
That's right. Just shortly after that, we graduated, and that's where they pinned their wings on us. And my mother and a cousin came with her from Kansas down there for the graduation, and she pinned the wings on me at that graduation. And I was real happy that she had the privilege of doing that. Well, I had about 2 or 3 days leave before I had to report my next duty, and I was assigned to fly Smyrna, Tennessee, and that was a B-24 4-engine, and that was the biggest bomber that was being used at that time.
And Smyrna, just to clarify, is right outside of Nashville up
It's
there.
about 15 miles southeast of Nashville.
Yeah.
There's a big auto plant there in that vicinity now, and I don't think the field, I don't know whether it's used at all anymore or not, but it was almost a part of that little town there. Probably hadn't over 200 people in the town, but we'd fly right over the town on our takeoff or our approach on one end of one of the main runways. We went through training there about 2 months, flying the B-24 and soloed in that, and they were going to, the class was moving on to the next training base, which was picking up a plane and a crew and training with a crew. Well, I thought we'd be shipping out, and then the next thing I did find out that they'd held me back to be an instructor on the B-24. So I stayed there in Nashville almost a year instructing the new students coming through there. And during that period of time, oil fields.
Pulaski oil fields, right?
Yes, Pulaski. And those boys took a terrible beating. They flew out of North Africa across the Mediterranean Sea to Romania, where they bombed the oil fields, and they lost, out of 175 B-24s, they lost 50 24s in that one mission, and that was a terrible ordeal. It was so hard on the crews that even survived. Well, after that, they sent a bunch of those boys that refused to fly. They just didn't care what they did with them. They wasn't going to fly anymore. They'd survived that mission. Well, they sent a bunch of those pilots to Smyrna, where I was, and I got assigned a bunch of them to take them and get them back to flying.
That was some interesting stories right there from what you've told me over the years about the reactions of some of those pilots that you had to basically retrain to get it back up in the air. And
Well, when I'd take them out, and they had already, I was doing maximum performance with the airplane, showing them what the airplane actually could do, but you was right on the edge of flying safely. But anyway, I'd get them in the airplane and hold the brakes, and I'd have them in the pilot's seat. We'd release the brakes with full power and get it down out to about 65 miles an hour and dump some flaps, and it would jump off of the runway just enough that you could start the wheels up and get it up to 95 miles an hour, and then pull it up in a steep climb just above stalling speed. And I've had them slap my hand when I'd go into some of those maneuvers, and I've had them tell me off, and I just smile at them and so forth.
Cuss you out.
And
basically.
But one of these times, one of the boys had, when you get in and get on the seat's like in an automobile. You can slide them forward or backwards to adjust your size and your legs length, and so that you got control with the brakes and so forth. Well, the rudder pedal is the main thing, and the brakes when you're wanting to stop or so forth in an airplane. But anyway, this one student, he had failed to lock it in position, and when I pulled it up in a steep climb, his seat started rolling backwards, and he held on to the
yoke.
The control,
the yoke,
and that just turned us almost straight up, and I hit it with everything I had and broke him loose from it, and I got the nose just down just before we was stalled, and was able to recover on the thing. And the tower called up and wanted to know what we was trying to pull, and I told them we like to bought the farm. And we did. We come awful close to buying the farm. And another time, there at Nashville, they'd send us, there was so many of us that were in training, they had to use all different fields around in our area that we could go and do landings, take off, and all kinds of maneuvers off of the runway. Touch and goes. Went to Nashville, Berry Field there. It was probably about 10 o'clock at night, because we were scheduled of 3 different periods of time from one day to the next. You'd fly your turn either 6 hours in the morning from 6 to 12, or 6 hours in the afternoon from 12 to 6 in the evening, and the third time from 6 in the evening till midnight, and that was your period for that time, and it rotated where we had so many 12 hours in between each one of those, and then we'd have a break of 72 hours that we were free from flying until we started another series like that. Well, we were at Nashville at night flying, and I had 4 students, And I think that same night is the night that we flew and made touch and goes with a B-24. We made 20 landings in 5 hours. That's about what time you had, because time you took off, got ready and got take off, and you had to be back in so they could service the plane for the next group to take off. About 10 o'clock that night, as we was coming in, and they had another runway where the commercial planes come in, and a commercial plane come in, was landing about time we were landing. We was almost side by side, and so we made two complete rounds, and we noticed that the plane was back out on the end of the runway getting ready to take off, and we were busy coming in preparing to land, and it was just a touch and go, and we cleared the field and was climbing out and got up about 600-700 feet. We were in the traffic pattern to the left, and they were on our right, and it's dark, and I was kind of talking with the student and then giving him some instruction, and just out of the corner of my eye, as I saw these lights coming right at us of the planes that had the lights on the wings, into the wing tips and the tail, and we were at the same level, but he cut across. He was supposed to go straight on out of the traffic pattern, but he got into the air and he started turning towards his next destination.
Across y'all's
and
flight path.
Right across our path.
Flight
and
path,
I had to hit the controls, and I just barely went underneath of him. We were so close to having a midair. We were exactly the same altitude at that moment, and
well,
it was such a close call that we just was sort of amazed that we missed.
It's amazing to think back during that time. You had nothing near the technology that you've got these days.
No, we were
you didn't have really that good of air traffic control like we got. They might have had a tower on the field, but they didn't have radar or nothing like that where they could give separation. They didn't give orders.
No, they didn't give us any orders about that at all.
And so basically y'all were out there on your own, and it's amazing that y'all didn't have more mid-air collisions than you did.
They was quite a few took place.
Yeah, I'm sure there was, but it just goes to show the difference between then and now. You know, the how far we've come in technology.
Yes.
and all.
All we had was a map on our lap,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd have to, at night, we'd have to spot the towns. Of course, towns back then showed up by themselves. Today, everybody's got lights at night, and you can't hardly see where a town begins or ends.
Right.
It's the whole country is lit up at night, and back then it was just the towns. It was all that was lit up.
Yeah, made it a whole lot easier. But anyway, we're going to have to bring this episode to a close, but we're going to get started on the next one. So let's end it right there with that, and then we'll pick up with some more of your stories of giving flight instruction there at Smyrna before you was sent overseas to actually do combat missions over Western Europe and all. So we'll stop it right there. We'll bring it to a close, and just want to thank all of our viewers for being with us during this time, and hope everybody is doing safe and is healthy. Our prayers are with the ones who have had the coronavirus, or who have had friends and loved ones family that may have suffered from it or even lost ones to it. Our thoughts and prayers are with you during this time, and we hope that all of this coronavirus, this pandemic, will end very soon. So until next time, take care, and we will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of Thoughts in History from a Centenarian with Dell Dyer. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And if you want to get notified of any new episodes we upload, turn on notifications by clicking on the bell at the upper right hand corner of your screen. As always, thanks again, stay safe out there, and we will see you in our next episode.